Mark, are you ready? You tell me when and I'm gonna get started. Okay, I'm ready. We're back with the final segment of post-Harvey moving forward. My name is Charles X. White. I'm with Charity Productions. I'm your host. We just finished a national panel, and I want to go over the intended outcomes once more for those who have joined us later, in-house and in the viewing audience. Our intended outcomes for this symposium, there are four. To establish an ongoing unilateral discussion related to marginalized communities as solution partners. And what this and why this is important is because local jurisdictions seem to rule out the contributions, the intellectual capacity and value of homeowners in neighborhoods that have been identified as marginal. The project that we're involved in with Texas A&M University has to do with coming up with a blueprint on solutions for any neighborhood subdivision that's in this particular footprint or that's not in this footprint. So what we want to do is have scientific data to explain to local jurisdictions the value of the people in the neighborhood. Number two, to open a more technical baseline of communication with pathways that improve service delivery and mitigate threats to the underserved populations. Now, people that pay taxes should be afforded services from the jurisdiction that they're paying taxes to. Roads, health, education. That's what we're talking about. Number three, to inspire you in the viewing audience and in the auditorium, to inspire stakeholders, scholars, professionals, practitioners, and businesses to work together more efficiently through training, tabletop field exercises, and public policy. And the component that's the most critical that drives services and money is public policy. And finally, with how we are capturing this information on the video, it provides, we are to establish a digital, interactive, research-based reference platform. This panel represents the platform. It also is part of that technical baseline of communication from a technological standpoint, and this is our reference file. So what we are trying to do is bring out the value of human capital in these zip codes and turn it into social capital, ultimately evolving to community capital and assets. That is what we have to leverage. The National Volunteer Calculator says the minimum value that you have is $24.14 an hour. That's your minimum value. We can leverage that, and you don't have to have all of the knowledge to write and apply for a grant. As Texas A&M says, they are a resource to help do that. We have some of the graduate students here today that work with us in developing this blueprint that we piloted in Sunnyside and South Park. So I just wanted to reframe it a little bit to let you know that this is your digital research file that will be posted on YouTube that you can go back and look at some of the questions. Now, if you have a question, you need to text it to 713-725-0993. That's 713-725-0993. Now, this is how we're going to conduct this portion. Each panelist, we're going to start with Tracy. And he's going to introduce himself. And he's going to take about 7 minutes to give you an impact statement in his area of expertise. And once Tracy finished, then Natalie, then we're going to come all the way down. Tell you what field of expertise they're in. After they have their statement, then we're going to come back to them and flush out some more questions. So if you in the audience have a question, or you in the viewing audience have a question, keep your mind wits about you, so when we get to that Q&A, you'll have it. So we're going to start with Tracy, then we're going to go to Natalie right down the line, and then I'm going to come back, and then we're going to explore. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then explore. So we good?
Yeah, we good.
All right, you up.
Okay. Hello, I'm Tracy Stephens. I am previously retired from the City of Houston Public Works and Engineering, where I was in street and drainage for almost 30 years. After that, I was into environmental cleanup, whereas I am now, I am the president of Sunnyside Civic Club. I am also the chairman for South Park Super Neighborhood for infrastructure, redevelopment, and rehab. I am also the vice chair for the GovTERS board, which is Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone, and I'm a board member for the organization of ACTS. I work for Public Works, building roads, drainage systems, repairing and maintenance for over 25 plus years. And I've worked all over this city from the 70s all the way up to the around 2000. I worked for 6 past mayors, which I've seen the politics, the coming and going for 6 mayoral and their council members thereof. Now, the biggest issues that we have now, we're talking about flooding and drainage, is that we today, the city, when I say we today, like Charles said, we are not getting our money worth for the taxes that we pay. Now, those communities that he has on the map shows you mostly the east side of town, which is predominantly the black and brown sections of Houston, where mostly of that drainage system is open ditches. Now, there are several different types of drainage systems, and they all work together. So you have the city drains into the county drains into the Port of Houston, which is federal. So they all work hand in hand. Now, we also have policies and ordinances that govern what we're supposed to do in those systems. It also tells the city, the county, and the government what they're supposed to do for us as to providing services to those systems. Now, as we continue to build, some of our systems haven't been maintained. We have systems, I know, that's 60, 70 years old that have not received any maintenance whatsoever since they were initially built. Now, it's just like your car. If you never maintain it, you're gonna have problems. Like the lady said earlier, buy a house, you never maintain it, you're gonna have problems. The same thing works with your infrastructure. Now, the mayor, the judge, I all been talking about, well, we got billions of dollars we're gonna spend on this side of town, we're gonna do this. But have you heard them say that we're going to spend this amount of money over here? Do we have this project that we're going to do over here? Are we going to study this area over here? No. If you follow what they are saying, there are certain areas of the city and the county that they're focused on. Now, we talk about Harvey, we talk about Ike, we talk about Katrina. I can go back further than that. We can go back to Allison. Allison devastated the majority of the east side of town where these communities are located. After Allison, they came up with plans. They did studies for what they should do after that to help prevent what happened this time. They didn't do it. They didn't abide by their own studies that they spent millions of dollars for to mitigate what happened this time. Fire department didn't get the equipment they were supposed to get after Allison. They still don't have all of it. Police department, same thing. The National Guard, same thing. But they continue to study, spend our money, but we are not getting any return back for our money in our neighborhoods. Now, they talk about the bios. We need to do this to the bio. We need to do this to the dam. But they are not talking about the money that need to be spent in the community in order to get the water out of the community to those systems. That's just like this facility. What are they going to do to get the water out of this community out to the main system? They're not speaking of that. And so that's what we need to do. Our elected officials, the ones who are talking about, well, we plan on doing this, we plan on doing that. We need to have them to tell us, okay, what are you going to do in my neighborhood? Because I may not have flooded this time, but I may flood the next time. So what money are you going to spend to help prevent my neighborhood from flooding like it happened over here? Now, the system once upon a time used to be we go out and we do routine maintenance like you do on your car. You change the tires, you change the oil. The city used to do that. The city do not operate like that anymore. Basically, it's if you complain, we'll come out. If you don't complain, we won't come out. They'll tell you we don't have the money or the resources to do the routine maintenance like we used to do. Well, you getting all of this money. You've had the money. They have money to spend if they want to spend it and where they want to spend it. So when they come out and say, well, we don't have this type of money, we don't have this. Then a week or two later, you see them spending a bunch of money over here to build a dog park. Okay, would you have rather had your drainage fixed other than a dog park? Planting a bunch of trees, you know. So they have money. It's just that we have to get them to spend the money in the communities that need it and have been neglected for decades.
I agree. And what I'm going to talk about, I think, provides sort of a bigger picture to what you're saying in terms of the way we approach disaster and other threats to quote-unquote security. So I'm a assistant professor at Sam Houston State University. I've done research on Hurricane Katrina. I lived in New Orleans for a long time. Was personally affected by Harvey, and so that's why I'm here, even though I kind of wanted to get out of the disaster world, because as you'll find out, I've become a little disenchanted with this world. So what I'm going to do is read you. I wrote an article. This is not an academic article, so you don't have to worry about being bored to death. It was published in a Brooklyn magazine, and to give you an indication of where I'm coming from, and I hope you don't regret inviting me here. Where's Charlie? Charlie. After I read this, because it kind of goes against or questions some of the things that we've been talking about during this event. So the title is called "Disaster Preparedness is an Illusion." So we can talk about this.
Yeah, come on.
Okay. I'm going to read. You missed what I said, so I'm going to read something I wrote.
The gist of it now.
Yeah.
You finna drop a bomb on
I'm about to drop a bomb on everybody. All right, so get a kit, make a plan, be informed is a simple mantra, but wasted dollars and lives haunt the empty spaces of this command. Disaster management on an institutional level performs an illusion of security or a collectively shared pretense that people can prevent such events from occurring if a collection of actions is undertaken. It's a fantasy, mainly because managing large-scale disruptions in a meaningful way is something we're generally very poor at doing, as been demonstrated many times. Despite countless instances of failure during big disasters, scholars, emergency management professionals, and even members of the public place great trust in the concept of preparedness, as well as in the institutions set up to respond to disasters as guarantors of a safe and normal future. Among such failures are the crisis spectacles like 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and now Harvey and Maria. Our institutions throw paper towels at hurricane victims, call them refugees in their own country, and pull guns on them like enemy combatants in Iraq, even though they are in New Orleans. Is this the homeland that we seek to secure? Here in the United States, we have built up vast, hierarchical, but mostly ineffectual and extremely expensive homeland security institutions, especially since September 11th, 2001. What has been established to protect us from terrorists has been extended to natural disasters and other issues like biothreats. In the constantly threatened landscape of our country, we worry more about ISIS and the Zika virus than about what, statistically speaking, actually threatens us, our bodies, loves, vices, and personal miseries. We cling to empty practices like storming grocery stores for bread, milk, eggs, and water before a hurricane, for example, in the hopes that if something bad happens, we can maintain control over disruption in the facade of normalcy that makes up what we think of as everyday life. We try to remember a world without the TSA, a world where we could walk in a US airport as if it were a shopping mall. As a scholar who's studied big crises like Hurricane Katrina and Harvey, as well as how people understand other threats like terrorism, I'm in a position to write something here in this magazine that would be a bit taboo to state in an academic paper. There is no real body of scientific evidence that shows a direct correlation between preparedness actions like assembling kits, making plans, and being informed and successful response to disaster. I've studied disasters, preparedness, and response for almost a decade and published papers that make this argument in a passive-aggressive manner. But while I can't say it outright in my world, I can say it here. The reality of disasters is, in general, that if you and your loved ones don't die, you'll continue to live. Your life might suck a little, or a lot, depending on your context, but mostly on the extent of your means. And I underscore the latter. However, the common notion of preparedness as espoused by authorities in the media and emergency management entities is connected to the concept of resilience, which is the gold standard of human behavior in crisis situations. There is an intense focus in disaster practice circles on figuring out how to build resilience, only to neglect the pre-existing strengths of even the most disadvantaged people when it stares them in the face. Further, academics have come to little consensus on what constitutes disaster, let alone what it means to be prepared for or respond to it successfully. Yet American society still persists in an almost religious belief that preparedness as connected to resilience is the answer to a future problem of disaster. It's not. Sorry to say. Preparedness is an ideology or a fantasy and never really works in practice, at least as demonstrated in scientific research. This assertion feels scary to many, even to the very scholars and practitioners who understand the science. Yet scholars in multiple fields that range from artificial intelligence, organizational studies, disaster research even, have essentially shown that planning and preparedness as related practices serve more to provide a framework for human action than dictate it. What matters most, they argue, is an ability to adapt in context. Empirical studies on a range of disasters also indicate this assertion is true. For example, I've been to countless practitioner and academic conferences that directly connect a need to bring planning and preparedness practices and connected knowledge to disaster vulnerable communities. Here, the goal is to pass off information to such groups, like those of little means, as a way to hand the responsibility of response to them so they can make themselves disaster resilient. Again, research on how disasters unfold and their short and long-term consequences demonstrates this practice is a waste of time. There are many reasons preparedness doesn't really work, mainly because preparedness and associated acts of planning cannot account for the dynamic nature of human social life, which is especially heightened in extreme stress. Many of those without means cannot undertake actions prescribed within the preparedness infrastructure. If you don't have a car, you can't evacuate. If you can't afford food, you cannot buy supplies. If you have trouble getting the drugs you are addicted to in normal times, you are most likely going to suffer withdrawal and disaster. If you are a 71-year-old man in the initial throes of dementia and an alcoholic to boot, you're going to drown in your house when the city doesn't take great effort to inform you that they're releasing floodwaters into your neighborhood to save other parts of the city.
No, right there, Doc. Because, see, you talking my language.
I wasn't.
Look, wait a minute. You talking my language, the part that I understood. Now, we're going to come back to you, but let me give you this point. The government accounting office in 2010 published a report 10-193. So y'all can look it up. And in what you just said, some of what you just said is in that report.
That's good.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that with you, okay?
Yeah.
Because we're going to come back to it. I want you to flush that out when we come back, but I want to move down the line, then we're going to come back, because, see, I got a challenge for you, and I got an amen for you, all right?
I like a challenge.
All right. Doc?
All right. Hello. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the Texas Southern University for hosting this, and I'm very honored to be among all those prestigious people on my panel and the national panel before. And I have to say that Mrs. Anderson is the only person in the world that can make me run. I did the dash last year in Boulder during the hazards workshop, and it was more of a walk than a run, but very impressed with your work, and thank you for what you do. So I come here to talk a little bit about, I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Security Studies at Sam Houston State University. And as such, I have done quite a lot of practical and applied research with emergency response and training within the National Incident Management System, and also did some stuff on leadership. But I want to talk about what I really have a passion for, which is the academic community engagement. My university, and I'm very privileged to say that, has a center where we have coordinators for colleges, different colleges, who facilitate the work of the faculty that try to do applied work with a community and matching that faculty and those students in those classes with community partners. And so at the College of Nursing, for example, we might be matching them on health issues. In criminal justice, we might be linking somebody in victim studies with work at the hospitality home, which hosts people that come in when they need to meet the inmates and their families of inmates, and they don't have a means to stay in a hotel or they stay at that home. So my work is to link the projects of the faculty with the community, and I have found teaching the emergency management disaster courses that in emergency management, that type of community engagement by the faculty and by the students is very critical. And I believe that at the basic mission, the university or institution of higher education, obviously they are there to procure research. And that's that empirical research that we are basing our decisions on, and implementing policies. But the job of a university is also a public service. And I think that's for the public university or institution of higher education, it's a paramount job. And universities are anchored in communities. And so they are ideally positioned to be that sort of incubator for bringing the community closer to the topics and working out the solutions together. But I don't particularly believe in service learning for service learning per se, like it's been institutionalized for decades, where we decide what the community needs, and then we perform that type of research or that type of service. It's more of a reciprocal relationship where the community partners of those groups or organizations come to the university and say, this is what we need studied. This is what we need to know. This is a type of advocacy that we need who can do it for us, whether it be it in housing, whether it be in risk reduction, whether it be it in, influencing policy, figuring out from the College of Finance, how the money flows in the recovery phase. So I am very strong supporters of the university's missions to do that, and I don't think that the universities or institutions of higher education on that whole community approach, they're not a pivotal piece that's mentioned in all those national frameworks. And in addition to the whole capital that the university possesses between the students that want to do something when Harvey happens, and they need to be somehow energized and channeled and sent and directed to faculty who typically in universities in the United States, faculty come to work at a university from somewhere else. This is for a variety of reasons, nepotism and all that, and so we don't incubate our own ideas. So when they come to the university, typically they do not know the community. So by working through classes that support community engagement, that faculty actually can know what they write about. Because a lot of times the research that happens is not really grounded in that particular community per se. So this is sort of a departure for me as far as preparedness and what Dr. Baker said. I think that Dr. Van Zandt in a previous session was trying to make that separation between preparedness and risk reduction. And I think that it's a linguistic separation that has consequences, because risk reduction means that we are responsible for it. This goes really strongly to what we can do to reduce, whereas preparedness is really throwing the towel towards the community and saying, you're not prepared. So I like the term risk reduction, and I like the focus back on, the looking at the processes that we're talking about as mitigation, helping a community mitigate. So we had somebody from Mark Smith from Red Cross who was talking about initiatives such as Pillowcase and Fire Safety Campaign. And he mentioned both specifically, and I have to tell you that I engaged my students in both in my community. And my community is both, as far as academic attainment, below the national average, as far as poverty, double the national average, and we are a very poor county. We are Sam Houston State University is in Walker County. So we do have those issues that are typical of marginalized populations. And I'll tell you, there is no Red Cross in Huntsville. Red Cross became very regionalized, and in the last decade, and Red Cross is trying to reach communities, but the closest office for Red Cross is in Spring, and I hear that office actually relocates as of recently as well. So the pillowcase of a fire safety campaign by Red Cross cannot be brought in to Huntsville community very easily. It takes a lot of effort to set it up. It takes a lot of effort to know the vulnerability of a community, to know who the horse whisperer is in that community, who is going to facilitate spreading the word. And the assumption made by the Red Cross that most of the people in Huntsville know who they are is false as well, because most of our Hispanic populations that are getting a flyer in Spanish are not going to open the doors because they are thinking that they are being sold something. So I'm talking about that because I want to stress that we are all here for the common purpose, but our efforts are fragmented. And they're happening in a lot of different silos. There is research here, there's NGOs there, there's National Consortium on Preparedness there, whereas in reality, it has to be a lot more tightened together. And the whole community concept is good, but is it truly about whole community? So I propose to you that universities need to take a much more active roles because they are potentially a good bridge or a good foundation or a good institution to sort of bring those different pieces together. A, because they do research. B, because they are in a community. C, because they have a lot of resources. So that's sort of where I come from.
What's your name?
My name is Dr. Magdalena Denham.
Okay.
Thanks, Charlie.
My name is Ronnie Harrison. I am with the Houston Fire Department. I've been with the fire department now 24 plus years. And when you talk about preparedness, that's basically what the fire department is. It's a disaster relief business. So every day we basically respond to personal disasters. You know, in the city of Houston, we make over 1,000 calls per day. So preparedness and training is basically, that is what we do. We prepare, we try to predict what's going to happen so that if it does happen, at least we have some type of training. When you think about preparedness and training, which is what we're talking about here, for a fireman, a lot of times we find ourselves in scary situations, lost in a burning building, can't find your way out, but we train for that. So the unknown does happen, panic does set in, but if you train, generally in that situation, your training will kick in and you'll remember the steps, 1, 2, 3, or whatever phonetic you use to calm yourself down and get yourself in place. My point is that we are for preparedness, and it is always a great thing when communities come together, our businesses come together, our schools come together and prepare so that when we do arrive on scene, there is some order. I mean, we're used to going into chaos and trying to develop a structure and put commands in place to work the system as best we can. But it's always easier when systems are in place when we show up and people meet us at the pump or at your home. We always talk about having a plan if your house catches on fire. Something very simple. At home, what should you do? And one thing we talk about is having a meeting place so you can tell a fire truck everybody's out or someone's in. That changes the whole scope of how we're going to attack the fire. So preparation is a great thing in life. I believe preparation is a great thing. Unknown is always scary. You may not always remove the scary, but you can be prepared the best you can when you come together and have discussions like this.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, for invitation and for sitting with this distinguished group. I'm Kaleem Kazmi. I'm a pediatrician by training. I'm a professor of pediatrics at UT Galveston. I also have a degree in public health and tropical diseases, which public health is very near and dear to me, of course, and that's the reason I'm sitting here right now. I also work as a city health officer for City of Alvin, and also serve on Chamber of Commerce, so I understand a lot of issues as the community itself is concerned, the local communities are concerned. Also, I work as a director or president for Human Health Foundation, which was started in about 2 years ago. It was an offshoot of a clinic which we opened 20 years ago. It's called Imam Sajjad Clinic, which serves the local population free of any charge, just on donation basis. One thing I have learned over time is when we provide these basic services to the community, we are trying to just put a Band-Aid. There's nothing else we are doing. We are not prepared really. As the rest of you mentioned, that providing those patchy services is not a good idea. I mean, it's a good idea for the time being, it's fine, but it's not the answer to our solution. You all know our system of healthcare in the United States is quite outdated and is in dire need of improvement. All industrialized nations, you all know probably, they are way ahead of us in this game. They are providing basic healthcare services to their people where people don't have to worry about day-to-day healthcare problems. We are still discussing healthcare as a privilege or as a right. It's mind-boggling. We are the strongest nation in the world. We are probably the richest in the world, and we cannot provide basic healthcare services to our community. It's kind of a shame, really. I'm a part of the system, and we are talking about in our conference every single day and figuring out what to do. But it comes to a point that you figure out there's no one solution for this. Not only the physician population can help it, health department, there are departments from city health to, we have county health to state health to federal health. But they are all working, as you mentioned, in silos. They are not working together. Our healthcare system, through preventive care, is in dire need. Our preventive care is in such shambles that we cannot reach our population. Right here, you see these 20 zip codes. I don't know how many clinics are in this area. Probably, Charles, you can help me out on that.
Probably about 10.
About 10 clinics. All right. So 10 clinics in this area, and it represents how much population representing? About 300,000 population. So you can understand when there's a need arises in case of disaster or in general case, where is this population going to go? Into 10 medical centers or small clinics? There is a huge disparity in healthcare in our society. There are those who have and there are those who do not have things, or healthcare in this case. We do provide services like Medicare, Medicaid, and there is very good funding from government, no doubt about that. And since Affordable Health Care Act, we have a significant increase in the population who do have their insurance. But does it increase the access to these clinics? No. I may have an insurance. This population sitting here may have insurance. Lady X lives about 15 miles from the nearest clinic. She has a 5-year-old and a 4-month-old child. She works 2 jobs. They want to come to my clinic. Now she have to earn her bread and then at the same time take care of the patients, those 2 kids. She have no car or may get a ride. It may take 4 hours of her day time to just arrive at that clinic and provide some service and get some services. Or she can go and work and get some money out of that. Now, when kids are sick, of course, mom will go and will take care of that. But when she's sick, probably with her diabetes or hypertension, she may say, yeah, I'll just cut half of the pill and I'll take it later. That's the situation in these communities right now. That's what we are looking at. Now, we cannot just say, well, government have to do this, government have to do that. Government is providing a lot of services, no doubt about that. I mean, we have state services, we have county services, but again, they are not in the appropriate places. So what is our goal? What is our responsibility as a community? For audience sitting here, we need to go in and identify the problems, what we are facing, and what we need at a given time. We cannot go out and say, hey, we need these services, and woof, something happens. It's not going to happen. We have to be organized at a local level. We have to help ourselves. When disaster happens, when other services are responding, fire departments are responding, health department should respond in conjunction with the fire department to provide basic services. We have to get prepared, we get trained for CPR. I can do CPR in my sleep now. It has been 20 years. I can intubate a patient in my sleep. Those 1-pound patient, I can save their life. But when I go out in the community in a disaster case, I'm not prepared. I don't know how to help that population. That's what we need at the grassroots level to have an impact on the society. Thank you.
Now, the fight is about to start. The first thing I want to say is the word community is the most bastardized word use when you're trying to describe some group in the community. Because I asked a government person, how do they, him included at that time, how do they have these meetings? And in the national protocols, it says you need to include the community. It says it. Presidential Directive number 8, section 22. Community should be. Community, community, and community. I said, well, how do y'all do that and y'all don't meet with us? They make decisions and we don't even know nothing about it. And if you're in a vulnerable neighborhood or a targeted neighborhood that has is low performing, like in school districts, low performing school districts and children that's labeled learning deficient sometimes get more money per child. But we don't get the service. The child never gets better. The label stays with the child. So my point is, this is what the guy told me. He said, when we have those meetings, we are the community, whoever's at that meeting. So they make decisions for the black community that doesn't have any service. I can track this back 60 years in this town. And it's always the same story. So let's define and redefine the words of communities and neighborhoods. That's one thing. Now, for young children, what is the trauma of a child that goes through a hurricane and has been through a trauma already of not having enough food or medicine? What happens with that? Tell us and tell the audience, how should we be responding? Because see, what we want to invoke, I want to invoke, oh, and let me make an additional correction. And see, I always have to do this whenever it comes up, so don't worry about it. I always have to do this. This is brought to you by Charity Productions. TSU didn't bring this here. I asked for TSU to be a co-host with Texas A&M. So we are co-hosting this, but your convener is Charity Production. So I just want to make that in the public over there, y'all on TV. Because I work hard to do this kind of stuff and get people to come together with all these different personalities and knowledge and learning and experiences. And I don't get paid for this, so y'all know that. And I do this. A good thing I got a day job. Now I'm through with that. Amen. Just that. Don't be laughing at me over there. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Thank you very much. And what was I saying? What? Start a fight. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So when I get down to you, Dr. Baker, this is what me and you where this fight gonna start, okay? I just want, so we're gonna go back this way. So let's talk about trauma and how a community, whatever community, is traumatized by having a compound fracture, and the compound fracture now is the disaster, or the hurricane, or the heat, or the flood.
What about the trauma?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
But as a child, he's going to answer it first. He's going to say what impact it had.
There are two impacts in my mind when I see these patients, or this is just a big trauma, but we see this every single day, kids coming off from abusive home or other situation too, but this is on a greater scale. Obviously, there are two kinds of trauma we are looking for. One is physical, which is pretty obvious, something happened to him. And the second was psychological, which is very hard to heal, obviously. Physical, we can patch it up and do things at that given time, but the main thing is to get those people out from the danger zone. As a first responder, and I could be the first responder also, so as I see a patient who is in dire need, it may be the family who has to escape, that's fine too, but we have to arrange for that. But if there's a disaster area, they have to get out we have to take care of that. And then after the physical well-being, we have to take care of the mental well-being immediately. And that is the long-term recovery. That's where the long-term recovery starts.
Now, Delaspore.
That's his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, Elmo Delaspore.
Elmo Delaspore.
Yeah.
Elmo Delaspore died about 10 years ago, and he, with the fire department, initiated, as far as I know, that campaign that we do about putting smoke detectors in homes.
Get Alarm Houston.
Yeah, get Alarm Houston. Now, here we are, the fire department. Trees are down, power is out, and you got a call that a lady that needs electricity to run a dialysis machine or something, no power. How is that coordinated with a city or the light company? How are all of those dynamics addressed, or do y'all discuss that?
Well, first of all, I am a firefighter, which means I am on the streets actually working. So there are people above me that do discuss that. Generally, when calls come in, unfortunately, they're not that detailed. When we get to the apparatus, you may have notes in there and it would say what you just said. So anytime we are dispatched as firefighters, we are very adamant about responding. So in the storm like Harvey, we've had tons of storms that come through here. When there are limbs down, the policy is that we cannot go past the limbs because you can damage the apparatuses, drive over them, or whatever the case may be. So a lot of times we have to walk to the location if it calls for that. And if a person needs electricity, we on the ground, on the street, would then send that message that this lady needs electricity. And then whatever happens on the other side, I'm not there, so I really can't speak to what happens, but there is something in place because we are waiting for a response for them to say, well, HLMP said, well, first of all, HLMP, it's not HLMP anymore. Centerpoint
Right.
does not give out estimated times of arrival.
You
So
still using HLMP, bro?
yeah, I'm not using it, man. I just
All right, I just checking. You know, HLMP been gone a long time.
a long time. You're right. Well, they just changed names, is what they done.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so on the street we do send it out. There is something happening. There's a lot of entities through the command structure, command OEC, Operation of Emergency Command, that they have everyone there and they make the calls and the process is put in place. But it still comes down to being able to get to the person. That's basically what it's going to come down to.
Now, Pastor Guilford is in the house, and about 11 years ago, we had a meeting with Centerpoint at his church, and we were trying to identify churches that once the power went out in a particular neighborhood, that we would have certain churches identified as medical triage locations or transport locations, and they were developing back then something where they would have like some kind of code where power would be turned on in that area a lot quicker because of the medical coordination. So a civic club or a church that has the facilities, showers and those kind of things, it would behoove a person in the audience, if your church and you have that interest, we've had Centerpoint out on several trainings that we do in the month of May over the years, and they will come out and explain it to you and will give you the details on how to make that work in your neighborhood if that kind of facility exists. But we did run into some problems Congressman Green, Reverend Nash, I think it was Ike, we rolled the neighborhood, Sunnyside, this in particular in Kennedy Heights, Crestmont, until 11:30 one night. We found 4 churches open as shelters. And I took that information to one of the jurisdictions. They didn't even want to know which churches were open. Liability. See, that's where the politics comes in. And we have to maneuver around the politics. The churches, some churches gonna open regardless, because that's what they do. But still, how can we connect the church to the service if the jurisdiction doesn't want to be connected? I'm just throwing that out there. Okay, Dr. Denham, it's on you now. Now,
Bring it on.
okay then. Anchor institutions. Now, I'm not talking about all communities, so let me be clear. I'm talking about the Black community. We have not had a genuine relationship with institutions since we was institutionalized. Way back there. Called, some say 1619. Some say 1555. But it's way back there. Most of the universities come in to take, write, get a grant, and get an award, and they gone. That is a common accepted practice today as I know it. That's not all, but that's what happens. Now, how do we in the community create a genuine working relationship to get empirical data, scientific research information to present our case, and we can write a grant and we can hire people from those grants, and not just the city, because the way it works with a city or a county, they'll get our signatures at a meeting, put that in a proposal as though we have agreed to do what they want to do, and over a period of 5 years, I've actually seen this happen, they go from 2 employees to 12, but they didn't hire 6 of the people from the community. So that's the kind of continual abuse of taking our information, utilizing it, and still we not benefiting. And that has happened, that I have experienced with Amoco Oil and Foundation in 1986 in Sunnyside up to this present day, as I see it. So from a university standpoint, how do we crack that wall?
Well, it is a very complex question. The one thing that I can think of is most of the educational institutions, when they do and undertake research with human subjects, which work in community would involve that, they have to go through the process called internal review board, which certifies that their work is done with all the requirements of protection of human subjects. In that protocol, in that process, there is a clause that requires that the gatekeepers to communities, people that will allow access to particular groups, grant permission. And those letters typically have to be on file before that IRB gets approved. And most of it, National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Justice, and those big national funds require our IRB process. It has to be in
What's
place.
IRB?
It's the Internal Review Board.
Okay.
It is the federal requirement that research that's being conducted, it's conducted protecting in an ethical way, with the maximum benefits to the society, maximum benefits to the human subject studied, and so that the value of the research is not skewed to where the harm to the community might be higher than the actual value of the research produced. And so the federal grants, when the federal grants come out, the first thing that needs to be filed, one of the very first things, is that IRB, which is with the IRB committee at the university, and that usually is under some legal counsel, research council at the university. And often, as you say, on those grants, the faculty would put a partner that they think, is going to work with them, or that they need access to, and the partners give those letters, very wholeheartedly because they want the work or their environment to be studied. I think if you advocate for much more stringent requirements from the faculty and researchers to how they can structure that partnership, what you're getting out of, if you say that you will allow the faculty research in that community only if XYZ people are involved, with, then
So we can actually put that as part of the contract, MOU, or whatever.
I think that is the logical progression. In the future, it's something that should be advocated for, because this is one area where you have a little bit of control. This is one area, this is one step where no research can start, no work can initiate until the researcher has a permission to study those areas from the gatekeeper. You would be a gatekeeper. Whoever is in a community that allows access is a gatekeeper. If that particular letter specifies that the researcher XYZ is allowed to do research provided that this is the outcome, you want 2 articles that are not scientific, the top tier journals that most of people cannot process, but you want some professional publication out of it, or you want a collaboration or something like that, you certainly can have a little bit of a degree of control of that. But I think that, Charlie, so that's one way, which is a little bit more of an obstructionist way for a university or faculty. I think it goes down back to building for the faculty and for the researchers, building the value of that they should want to bring back or co-write with professionals. Or, I think we need to start that dialogue on the value of those partnerships, because obviously you can impede or obstruct certain processes and to make this research less invasive or less, it has to be reciprocal. You can force it to be reciprocal, or you can try to build the culture of that the reciprocal is a moral must, that it's a ethical requirements.
Well, now the reason I'm saying some of this is because you got PhD students. And I had a discussion with them about the moral dilemma once they get into the real world. And so that's one of the reasons I'm going down this line, but now I'm coming to the dynamo question. You trying to tell us that mitigation ain't worth the hoot?
Me?
Yes.
No, I
Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say
You
mitigation.
didn't say that. Oh, which one is it now? Is it recovery?
Preparedness.
Oh, that's the one.
Yeah.
Now you stretch out a little bit on that, would you please?
Well, you didn't let me finish.
Yeah, that's what I say, stretch out on it.
So I'll read the rest of the article, which I think I'm reading it because I will go off on a tangent. I like to keep myself restrained.
Y'all can tell she's kind of colorful, right? Yeah,
Must be my blue hair. I'm not sure.
must be.
All right, so I'm going to read the rest of this, and then hopefully that'll answer your question. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean about preparedness on this larger level in terms of what emergency management institutions, including academia, those people who work, first responders, it's not to demean the work they're doing. I would never do that. What I mean by preparedness is the expectation that the public has to take responsibility for their personal safety and their lives in the instance of disaster strikes. And I'm talking about large disasters. I'm not talking about fires or smaller disasters. That clearly training and preparedness, I think, is absolutely important. I'm talking about this idea of preparedness as something the public needs to do in order to survive disasters, and that it's their responsibility. So that's what I'm talking about. In the rest of this article, I'm trying to ask if I'm saying this approach to disaster doesn't work, then why do we still do it, and what can we do instead? And I really want to ask who I mean by we in this, and I think I'm pointing to the institutions, the system, not the members of the public, because I get really irritated when we look to the public as if they are supposed to do something we're telling them to do. I take issue with this. So the answer to these questions rests in what we already know about crisis. And what is it that we know about what happens in disaster? What happens in disaster? Does chaos happen? Does looting happen? Do people panic? Do they go crazy? Is that what happens during disaster? Yes. No. Time and time again, since the advent of disaster scholarship, scholars have shown that this does not happen during disasters. In fact, what does happen is that people are at their best. They engage in pro-social behavior. Okay, so that's one problem. I argue, and a lot of other people argue, that this idea of preparedness is a way to perform a sense of security over the unknown, okay, rather than ensure the future is secure. It makes us feel safe, basically, on a sort of theoretical level. But my problem is, and I say it's insidious, and so what I mean by that, it's not a good thing. This obsession with planning to harness the chaos of the future allows us to neglect what brings us to disaster in the first place, and this is the most important part. Poverty, inequality, capitalism, colonialism, and so on. And I think this issue of colonialism goes into what you're asking about, the problem with academia and how academics go into communities, they appropriate knowledge and they take it back to their ivory tower and they do nothing with it while the community doesn't benefit whatsoever. And it's because of this societal issue, right? It isn't a problem of communities better engaging with academics, it's academics recognizing that they're part of the problem. But they don't see that right now.
Right.
So we're not at that level. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but that is my conclusion as an academic, as someone who's entered these worlds of academia and disaster scholarship for some time now. All right, and so to go on, I use the example of Hurricane Katrina. So Hurricane Katrina showed the color of disaster. Those most affected by the storm were poor, Black, and/or elderly. Most of the dead from Harvey were people of color, citizens who tried to rescue people, and animals, people who died were trying to rescue animals too, or those left vulnerable in some other capacity, as in the case of my cousin's husband, the 71-year-old man who drowned at his home. Preparedness allows the inaction of people like those in New Orleans or Houston who did not evacuate, mainly because they had no choice, or collect supplies to become their burden. So in this sense, if you do not prepare as you are told to, then it is your fault for what happens to you in a disaster. This assumption vastly neglects how people actually behave when infrastructure crumbles. So this is a large-scale disaster like Harvey where infrastructure crumbles. Keep that in mind. So people don't loot, they don't panic, and there is no social chaos. What does happen time and time again is emergent collective action where publics perform the burden of disaster response alongside, or in the absence of first responders, for whatever reason. I'm not blaming the first responders at all. So disaster institutions fail us when we need them the most because at this point humans can't control uncertainty. Context and means are what matters most for individuals and communities, and I don't like using that word community because it's such a contentious term, but I am, so sorry. What saves us in dire times when everyday life fails us is ourselves, our family, our neighbors, and strangers. What puts us at risk is our individualistic, increasingly expensive, militarizing security culture, which both burdens and blames citizenry with the vulnerabilities they are expected to rise above in times of disaster. So we spend more money on, and I've seen this firsthand, beefing up police departments with military equipment than we do on poverty alleviation programs. Fears of terrorism, active shooters now in the public arena, and foreign disease seem to necessitate the allocation of funds to create new ways and technology to thwart a host of looming enemy invasions. Yet disasters, whether large or small, happen much more often than the former. Our infrastructures are crumbling, putting us at much more risk to our natural and man-made environments than the fantastical evils we're bombarded with via news, which is a problem. Further, poverty, race, age, and social isolation are perhaps the biggest predictors of the negative consequences of disaster. None of these issues are in line to be addressed in current disaster management institutions or governmental entities tasked to protect us from these things. So I say in this, there's little hope this will change. In the meantime, the solution I offer is to know and care for your neighbors.
Now, that was a powerful statement after all that other stuff you said. I wasn't expecting that crescendo there. You something
That's
else.
why I said you should let me finish.
Yeah, well, I did, finally got to it. We're going to.
Finally got through
Yeah.
it.
Let me see, are any questions looming right now? Okay. Could you go to the mic?
Hello, thank you to the panelists. My name is Cristina Munoz. I'm a graduate student at the University of Iowa and a Bill Anderson Fund Fellow. I have a question for Tracy Stephens. You mentioned that the city of Houston received millions of dollars that are not being equitably distributed to taxpayers who are still affected by Harvey. In your opinion, has FEMA assistance been distributed equitably from floods and hurricanes in Texas in the last 3 years? And if not, what are the barriers to distributing FEMA assistance equitably? Thank you.
Okay. The city hasn't distributed the money equitably. They haven't done it for years, for decades, because if you look at our communities, it speaks for themselves. I'll give you an example. The South Park neighborhood was built around World War I, World War II, and the city hasn't done any maintenance to those same streets in that community since they actually built them. They know they're there, they know the condition they're in, but what they say now is when you go to a neighborhood that if they had have done the routine maintenance throughout the years, they never would be in the condition that they are now. So basically, what they're doing is neglecting, then postponing. Because the same analogy, if you don't change the oil in your car, in your motor, okay, pretty soon you're gonna need an entire engine. So what the city says now, well, we can no longer perform routine maintenance on those roads. It has to be a capital improvement project, which it has to go against other projects for funding. You've already waited decades for the service that you didn't get, and now they add you to this other list that you still have to wait, and it still may not get funded. FEMA, the same way. Now, I've found out that housing, we talked about housing. You can use housing money to improve the infrastructure. Because if you build a housing complex and you're trying to use the same infrastructure that's outdated, what's the purpose? The system is not going to perform like it's supposed to, and you're going to be in a world of a lot more trouble than what you were before you even started.
Tracy, tell them about that city ordinance in chapter 42 in Rebuild Houston.
Well, the city has an ordinance that says that the abutting property owner is responsible for certain maintenance in front of their property. And what Charles was saying, the infrastructure in front of your property, whether it's a concrete street or you have open road drainage, the city would quote you that ordinance in order not for them to perform what they're supposed to. They will say that The ordinance says the property owner is supposed to repair their driveway, to fix the curb, to fix the culverts under the driveway, because your property fronts that infrastructure. However, Rebuild Houston drainage ordinance that we've been paying for years, they've been collecting, it clearly states that your driveway, sidewalk, curb, culverts are all part of the drainage system, which the fee that we pay for, they supposed to maintain it, repair it, and improve it. But they will not tell you that. That way, it puts the responsibility where it's supposed to go, which is on the city. So you have them using an old ordinance and not telling you what the new ordinance say.
Now, that fits with what Dr. Baker said about blaming the victim, that there's an expectation that the community, broad-based, larger community, through preparedness, is going to meet an expectation. And what I'm saying to you, city and county for 19 years do not perform these field exercises that we have been doing for the last 19 years. Even though the city participates, HISD participates, the hospital district participates, but they don't fund us. It's not a systematic approach to mitigating risk or even being prepared. So when you hear that and tie it to a rain flood versus a hurricane flood, the infrastructure won't carry the water. And on this last point, because we're going to go off the air at 5, tell them about how the street is a secondary drainage system.
Streets are basically designed to carry water, to channel water to the system. Same as off-road drainage ditches. That's why when they made the new ordinance for Rebuild Houston, that's why it's included in the ordinance. The street, the curb, the gutter, your sidewalk, your driveways, all of that convey water away from your property, and it channels it to the system where the water needs to go to via your storm sewer inlet at the end of the block, which it goes underground, and it may go out to your local bayou, which your local bayou probably feeds into a larger channel like we have the Port of Houston. So that's why I say all of the systems are tied in together. But when you ask your representative or you call in your complaint, your service, their respond to you will not be that. It will not be that. They're going to quote you the old ordinance, which puts it solely on the property owner, unless you know better. Because I've gone into numerous neighborhoods around the city where they call me out, and I have to specifically call them out and tell them, no. Rebuild Houston says right here what you're supposed to do and what's covered. It's the same story. If you don't know, they're not going to tell you.
Now watch this. That same ordinance that they collect that money on went to court. A group took it, challenged it. And the judge and the appeals court ruled against the city and said that the language in the ordinance when we voted on it was deceptive. And that the city is supposed to give us that money back. Y'all think we got any money back? And they still collecting it. So again, the victim is blamed in this scenario. And as graduate students, what I'm trying to convey in this, and the two professors from Sam Houston State are kind of bringing it out more in an academic, good way to conversation that y'all all get. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I wanted y'all to hear that because when you face this challenge, you're going to be faced with it. You got to feed your family. But there's the voice of reason in those city meetings, county meetings, state meetings. You're going to have to be the voice of reason to show someone maybe there's another way to do it that will be more beneficial and less hurtful, because the way it is now is hurting the poor citizen and taxpayer. Tracy, your comment, then we're gonna come to Doc up here at the front. Then we're going closing statements. We'll probably go off the air before we get through, but after you, Dr. Kasemi, you first on your closing statement. What would you recommend to the listening audience as to how to maybe be a little more safety conscious and mitigate risk before hurricane season, or just risk-proofing their home? After Tracy, then Doc, and then we're gonna go on. You won't come back again, Tracy. You're gonna do your closing now.
What I would say is that we have to have our elected officials held accountable for what we are paying them to do. The city, the county, the government, all of them. We are paying them. They are keeping our money, but we are not getting the return on our money as we should. They can spend money wherever they want, whenever they want, but we are still lacking what we need, the basic services, in order to improve our neighborhood, let alone bring our neighborhoods up to standards. So we need to have them put their feet to the fire, put them on the fire.
You got some barbecue sauce?
No seasoning.
Dr. Kasemi?
My take is a little different in that. I mean, I've worked with the communities for a long time, and one thing I've learned over time is we can ask government to give this, give that, whatever. There are politics involved, and which is fine. It's involved, and then we should take care of those representatives as we should by our votes. However, at the end of the day, the responsibility should come to the community where we live also. It's very important to understand that point. If you don't do that, we will keep saying we are victims, and then X person should do this. We have to start ourselves something first. Once we start helping ourselves, people will help us out. Once we are activating things, services which is available, we should identify our own needs, what we need. We have to know where services are available. As a public health official, if I don't know that, what my community needs, I can provide them. I know what to do, but I can't help them if they can't help themselves. So they have to come up, like you have services, you know where services are needed, that's what we need in this area.
So what I would say in closing and being prepared is to be prepared. Don't wait until the weather service says there's going to be a storm. Keep things in your home that you already know. Like myself, I have 5-gallon water. I keep 5 of them back, and I just rotate them out to always have water, batteries, things that you know you need. Buy them up little by little so you don't have to buy them at one time, and always have a plan in any situation. If we always believe, and this is what I always say when I speak about safety, is that we always think it's not going to happen to us. And I wish that it doesn't happen to you, but when it does happen to you, it's better if you have a plan in place to help you.
Doc?
Well, I have 2 things, one for the community or viewers and one for the students. So for the viewers, if you have an institution of higher education, community college, university in your area, and if you don't know, you should know where your closest one is. Then echoing what the doctor said is identify what your needs are and expect from that university, expect from the research component of that university from different colleges, whether it's science, whether it's housing, whether it's agriculture, whether it's medical sciences, that they help you with it. That would be my thing. Go to that university and tell them what you need. Once you identify because there is some graduate and doctoral students and some professors would be very interested in working with you. For the students, doctoral students, I think that you will find mind that you will have to publish, and you will have to publish because scholarship is still one of the cornerstones of the academia. But when you write your dissertations, when you look at your topics, make sure that you ask yourself a question at the end of it, so what? When you write something, when you write a dissertation, think about it. What does it serve? What am I going to do with it? Can anybody use it, and what they can use it for?
So I'm more with you, Tracy. I'm more on the side of taking the burden off the public, who is actually paying members of multiple institutions to at the very least, keep our infrastructures running to a level of some quality, not even quality, just so it doesn't kill people, so people aren't starving, so people aren't further marginalized, because what disaster does is reveal the marginalizations that to everybody else who is kind of going through everyday life with everything they need and everything they have, all the food they need, all the shelter they need, all the money they need, they don't see it. And I don't want to burden you with tasking the politicians or holding their feet to the fire, taking them to the barbecue. Which never mind, I'm not going to say anything. People like us need to be the ones to do that. And then if you get into positions of power, if you get a PhD, if you're in academia, if you're in practice, then it becomes your responsibility to hold people in power as well as yourself to these basic civic rights that we're supposed to have.
Thank you. It's almost time to sign off, so I want to do the closing remark by saying we want to thank all of the panelists we had today, and Charity Productions was for the better of everyone in attendance and everyone's participation. We definitely want to thank Texas Southern University, Texas A&M, the Institute for Sustainable Communities, Sam Houston State, for their partnerships and for us working together as far as trying to get the information out as a team. This is not easy work. It's not hard work. It's not hard to continue when you're passionate about it. And for 40 years or something near, I've been passionate about it, doing what I can when I can. We're going to sign off. You're not going to hear me say what I'm going to say next. That's your loss. But thank you for viewing, and we'll see you next time. Community Views and Solutions. Charles X. White, your host. Okay, this is what I want to say. There's a saying, to he whom much is given, much is required. When you have a community that's been duped, beat down by their own people and all of the institutions for trying to do the right thing, we get beat down. Poll tax. We got to pay to vote. Then we got gerrymandering, taking our vote. Then we don't have a representative to represent our vote. In 1956, Sunnyside was annexed. We got the minutes to the meeting. City Council. Oscar Holcomb, the mayor, in a sidebar conversation with a city councilman, took the money from the new tax annexation of Sunnyside to the west side.
Montrose.
So when you ask somebody that's beat down to get up, and then we get beat down again, it's hard. So the responsibility has to be equal. That's why we got disparities. Because when we do our part, somebody else is doing us an injustice. So here's a disparity, here's a disparity. I can go categorically in every category and tell you almost to the year when and why this particular disparity happened in healthcare, education, crime. That's what all those maps are. Those maps represent 60 years of inequity and disparities by government, not by the people. From 1940 to 1997, black people was employed. We had all them houses, we were upgrading, we was doing all that. But you see them run down now, why? Black people not employed. Where the jobs go? You used to get a job skill in high school. They took it out. They put it in the penitentiary. Then they put it in the community college. You got to pay for it. I worked as a mechanic from high school. Can't do that now. 1995, and I'm through. 1995, I walked the halls of Austin, talked to black representatives, whites, and whoever I could talk to. Houston, Texas, combined the juvenile justice system and the educational system, made it a pipeline. That's, y'all heard that pipeline to prison? Where you could go from the classroom as a first grader, from the classroom to the penitentiary, TYC, juvenile probation, and then the penitentiary. I did that for 10 years as a volunteer. TYC, juvenile, Harris County juvenile probation. I saw it. And then they want to know where the black man at. In jail. Why? We got meetings going on right now in the community about public safety and police. Over-policing. So y'all have to look at it like at a different angle. There are people like me all over the United States doing this kind of stuff and don't get paid. This is what we do. So we need for y'all, when y'all get up there, to understand what's happening down here, because you could make a great difference by your word and your skill. Thank y'all for coming.